Hi, this is Travis over here at Exercise Lab with another video for you guys. So I'm a doctor of physical therapy. For those of you that don't know me, last video I uploaded, I deviated a little bit from the traditional format on this channel where normally I just pretty much show some exercises and I'll talk about them or some concepts and I'll demonstrate that stuff and then maybe I'll give my 2 cents at the end. The last video what I did is I did more of a discussion where I talked about 4 concepts, essentially 4 ideas of how you can increase your performance in some fairly unconventional ways. So feel free to check that video out. Today, what I decided to do is sort of piggyback off that and turn it on its head and talk about 4 things that you might already be doing on a regular basis that's decreasing your performance. So it's not always adding a bunch of new stuff. And, clearly I'm interested in that as well. I always want to know what's that new, fitness gadget, what's that new workout technique or supplement, that I can add to increase performance. But at the same time, there are things we do on a regular basis that might also be decreasing our performance. And clearly it would make sense to obviously try to minimize or eliminate those to really maximize our progress. So I'm going to be talking about some fairly, again, maybe unconventional things or things you haven't thought of that could be decreasing your performance. So that way you can get the most, bang for your buck in the gym. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more what I'm talking about and how to do that stuff, go ahead and stay tuned and we'll get started. All right, so I'm not going to necessarily, do these in any particular order. Some of these things are fairly hard to quantify, so I'm just going to put some of the broad bins out there and then I'll talk a little bit about, some of the nuances. But the one I'm going to throw out there first is going to be antioxidants, okay? And so antioxidants, we all know are generally good things. They can reduce inflammation, they can be, involved with like anti-cancer. They can essentially be involved with anti-aging, right? There's a lot of these words that get thrown around and antioxidants, we generally know are a good thing. And I would say most of the time that's probably true. Now, on the other hand, though, when we're talking about exercise, we do want some degree of oxidative stress to signal to my body that, hey, I just did a workout, and so my body needs to adapt to that. And oxidative stress seems to be a signal that facilitates protein synthesis, right? And protein synthesis is one of those things that facilitates muscle building, right? So if I'm in the gym and I'm trying to, increase muscle size, I'm trying to increase strength, I'm trying to basically improve my physique, aesthetically, and I want a little more muscle mass, well, then I don't want to do anything that's going to blunt that signal, right? And so if I go and I slam a huge shake, it's got a bunch of antioxidants in it. People love to load up on their smoothies and health smoothies and stuff, again, which is generally a good thing. But if you do that right after a workout, that's probably going to hamper your performance. Again, you can talk about, vitamins like vitamin C, vitamin E. Vitamin E especially because that one's a fat-soluble vitamin, which tends to stay in my system longer, whereas vitamin C, you tend to excrete more readily because it's water-soluble. Selenium, there's ALA, there's, so many different things we could talk about, CoQ10. So it's really hard to nail down all of these, but basically anything that's an antioxidant, can potentially work against you. Coffee is a great source of antioxidants. I remember reading something a while ago saying the average American, coffee is probably the most potent source of antioxidants, in their daily diet because unfortunately, many of them are not eating a lot of fruits and vegetables. And so, in general, if the only time you can get in your smoothie is around your workout, it's probably better to have it than to not have it. Just know that if you're trying to also optimize your muscle building, you might be working against yourself a little bit. So again, oxidative stress, somewhat of a good thing for exercise, not necessarily such a good thing for general health, right? So if you're eating a bunch of fried foods, and especially when they're recycling that that oil and it's been sitting there and they're just keep turning it over, that's a great way to get a bunch of oxygen-free radicals in your system. That's not a good thing. So I'm not necessarily saying go eat a bunch of fried food after a workout and that's going to give you better gains. I don't necessarily know that that's going to be true, and it's probably going to work against you. But as far as a workout's concerned, just physiological levels, the normal levels of oxygen-free radicals, oxidative stress that you build up with a workout does actually seem to be helpful. So how do you put that together? Pretty much what I would say is if you're going to do the the smoothies, if you're going to do high doses of antioxidants, you probably want to try to wait for a little while after your workout. So the longer probably the better. I would try to go at least a few hours at a minimum. If you can go like 3-4 hours, maybe even a little bit beyond that, that's probably going to be good. So it's not to say you can't eat something after a workout. I'm not going to be such a zealot about it that I'd say like you couldn't have a chocolate protein shake. Certainly you could have that if you wanted to. Not that timing is so critical like people used to think, but I would just probably not try to go too hard and heavy on the antioxidant front. Okay, so when you're choosing your meal, your post-workout meal or shake, I would just say save those antioxidants for a little bit later. Don't go drink a big glass of green tea or something like that. I would push that a little bit back if you can, and that'll probably help optimize your performance. All right, so the next category I'm going to talk about is cold. Ice kind of falls in the same bucket, no pun intended. But cold can also work against us when it comes to performance. Now, last week I talked about a way cold can increase performance via Palmer cooling. That's a little bit of a different category because we're using it kind of on a selective basis to kind of get cold into my system a little more readily, and that helps fend off fatigue. But if you overdo cold, that can also work against you. And so, cold showers have gotten a lot of attention. Ice in general has gotten a lot of attention, right? You see the people icing their knees. Obviously, rehab, settings, the acronym RICE has been around for a long time: rest, ice, compression, elevation. And so it used to be every time somebody had an ankle sprain, let's throw some cold on that right away. Cold is, sometimes overutilized though, because what cold does is it actually can decrease performance. And so sort of on the opposite end of what I talked about last week with BFR, BFR, one of the cool things about it, which is that blood flow restriction, it sort of keeps metabolites in the area longer to facilitate cell signaling, satellite cells and things of that nature that can basically signal an anabolic response. Now, cold can kind of work on the opposite end of that spectrum and attenuate that anabolic signaling. And so, we have different satellite cells, and I'm not going to get into the weeds too deeply with this, but, they have names like NCAM and PAC7, and basically these things are doing favorable things for us, from an anabolic perspective to signal that, oh, hey, this person worked out and we need to sort of, increase protein synthesis. We need to basically try to increase muscle mass, let this, person get stronger so that that workout is not such a stressful stimulus in the future. And so with cold, you're going to be potentially blunting that response. And so again, you don't want to necessarily be throwing cold on things right off the bat. If you're real sore, I don't know, maybe a strained tricep and, you want to do something for it, I think there are probably better things than throwing cold on it right away. And so to some degree, a little bit of inflammation can be a good thing. And so again, we know that obviously after exercise, there is some inflammation that is created, which will be a segue into the next thing I'm going to discuss. But as far as cold, I wouldn't use it too liberally. And, all the benefits that we're talking about with, cold showers, and that's obviously got a lot of attention lately. If you want those benefits, I would just say do it a different time, or ideally maybe even a different day. So same kind of thing with the antioxidants, the farther out you can push it. Now, if you were to do that cold shower before a workout, that may or may not decrease performance. I'd say the jury's probably out on that one. If you want to be uber safe though, again, I would say maybe just pick a different day for it. But if you took a cold shower, give yourself a little time to maybe rewarm and then did a workout, you're probably fine. But I wouldn't hit that cold shower right after a workout. And I probably would try to give yourself at least a handful of hours before you do that cold shower after the workout, if that's the only time you can squeeze it in and you really want to do it. So again, that's my 2 cents on cold showers. Ice and rehab, again, that's kind of another one that I'd say is a little bit of a tricky one. It probably deserves a different video. What I'll say for now is if you have something that's going to produce an undue amount of inflammation, you just had a knee replacement, that knee is going to get huge. Well, then sometimes you do want to hit it with all you can from an anti-inflammatory perspective, like ice, to try to reduce it, because obviously all that, inflammatory soup is going to impede movement. You're not going to move as well, and sometimes that can snowball. Now, if you just have a mild ankle sprain though, I don't necessarily know you need to throw ice on it, because again, you don't want to necessarily attenuate that tissue response, that can facilitate tissue healing and basically, get you back, faster in the long run, even though it doesn't necessarily feel as good in the short game. So I'll probably cover that a little bit more at length in another video, but for now, that's what I'm going to say on ice. All right, and so that's kind of a nice segue into the next category, which I'm going to talk about medications. And I'm going to talk about medications as kind of a broad bin again. I'm going to talk about NSAIDs, and I'm going to talk about sort of another category of medications or categories. NSAIDs specifically, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, which is, essentially your aspirin and your, acetaminophen, Tylenol, your Advil, those types of things. And so for a long time, people used to take, Advil right after a workout. Oh, you want to, fend off that DOMS, which is delayed onset muscle soreness. So, you get sore after a workout, and some people don't like the way that feels, and obviously it can be very uncomfortable if you get really sore. It's hard to stand up, hard to walk, all that stuff. And so people think, okay, let's just pop some Tylenol and then you can take the edge off of that. And to a degree, that's true, but you're also, again, sort of blunting that anabolic response potentially. And so we know NSAIDs work by inhibiting basically the COX pathway. And so, there's COX-1 and COX-2, sort of the broad categories. And one of those is sort of an anabolic response that's more in the COX-1, and the COX-2 is kind of more of that tissue injury response, right? And that's what gives us that soreness sensation. And sometimes, though, these NSAIDs are not very selective as far as which one they're targeting. And so you're going to blunt the anabolic response while you're also going to blunt that sort of soreness response. But again, if you can suffer through a bit of that soreness, you're probably going to get better anabolic response. And so I would probably encourage somebody, unless you're super sore, life is just really miserable, you probably don't want to be popping a bunch of NSAIDs around workout times. There's also some research that shows NSAIDs can mess with tissue healing and things of that nature. They obviously can create gastrointestinal distress. So you don't want to be too liberal with your use of NSAIDs anyways. But definitely from a anabolic workout perspective, I would say you want to try to keep them to a minimum to the degree you can. Again, on a personal level, if you're in a ton of pain, super sore, and you got to use one, it's probably not going to be the end of the world. But you don't want to get in the habit of using them all the time. Sometimes people almost prophylactically, they put some NSAIDs in their system before they're going to go for a run because they know their knees bother them, whatever. It's probably not the best strategy. when your goal is to optimize performance and really, again, optimize your physique, optimize your muscle building, all that kind of thing. So it really depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to just run as much as you can with as little pain as possible in the short game, well, then maybe you want to use the NSAIDs. But I don't think that's probably a very good long-term strategy, because if you're running with all kinds of pain and you're masking it, you're probably going to be running yourself into other problems, and more than likely, eventually, you're going to get to the point where those NSAIDs just aren't going to cut it. And that sort of segues into the next category, which is there are some broad categories that I think can also work against you. And again, it's not just my opinion, but there is some research that shows this. Opioids being one of those categories. Opioids can even decrease testosterone levels, and obviously we know testosterone is associated with good things. It facilitates muscle building. So opioids as a category, probably want to minimize or ideally avoid those if you're trying to really maximize an anabolic response with workouts. You probably also want to minimize, as a broad bin of categories, GLP-1 has gotten a lot of attention lately, obviously with drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy and Mounjaro. They're catabolic across the board, though, it seems like. And so, obviously we know that it's an appetite suppressant. We don't exactly know how they work, but we know that they obviously do trigger a lot of fat loss, which is generally a good thing for people who, have a lot of fat to lose and want to. But, if you're also losing muscle mass, and that's the thing we're not always talking about is, well, that person lost 25 pounds, where did it come from? The vast majority of it probably did come from fat, but there might have also been a contribution that's a significant contribution that did come from muscle as well. And so clearly that's not going to work out very well for us. Older people that already don't have a lot of muscle to lose may not be a great candidate for a drug like that, because again, that person doesn't have much to lose. They're going to be losing more muscle mass, and where is that going to put them, right? So, for somebody who's younger, though, GLP-1 inhibitor may not do a lot to you as far as a muscle loss perspective or, muscle building. It's not going to necessarily hamper your results, but you want to probably be mindful of it. Talk to your doctor about any of these categories. But I would say if it were me personally and I wanted to optimize the results, I'd probably be a little leery about them. Obviously, there's still going to be a lot of research that's going to come out on them. The jury's very much out on that. But for now, GLP-1 I probably would try to stay away from. As another bin, what's kind of an interesting category, actually, as far as medications are concerned, is that drug metformin. Metformin is used for diabetes, right? And so it's, gotten some pretty favorable attention as far as, what it can do for us, as far as what they call geroprotection. Can it facilitate some of the things we like, some of the good things that sort of enable a long life? Perhaps, but I think, again, the jury's out on that. There was an interesting study that showed that when it came to individuals with bed rest, again, you just put somebody in bed and you don't really have them be very active. We know that atrophy tends to happen, which is essentially muscle loss, muscle wasting, and it happens pretty quickly. For whatever reason, some people who were on that drug metformin didn't have quite as much muscle loss when they were basically on bed rest. Now, does that apply to somebody who's very fit and active and healthy? Is that person going to necessarily get any type of an anabolic benefit? Or are they going to decrease the catabolic effects of overtraining maybe? My guess is it probably won't. And on the higher end of the spectrum, it seems like it might even decrease performance. And so I don't know how much you want to mess with your glucose disposal when we're talking about an endurance athlete, when we're talking about somebody who's really trying to push hypertrophy, who's really taking their muscles to failure, and they really need all that glucose on board that they can essentially get. And then all of a sudden you put a drug on board like metformin. I don't know if that's necessarily, at least in theory, going to be the best thing for you. Obviously, though, it always warrants talking to your endocrinologist about. My guess is, though, if you're somebody who's just kind of on the cusp of type 2 diabetes, you're probably not somebody who's doing, extremely intense hypertrophy workouts on a regular basis anyways, because, there's a good chance if you were doing those things, you may not even have type 2 diabetes to begin with. Now, if you're somebody who's looking to take it, not necessarily because your blood glucose is, off and you have diabetes, but really more because you're looking for the geroprotection, longevity benefits, and you're also looking to optimize performance, I'd say you have to weigh the pros and cons there. As far as the literature is concerned, again, it's not extremely conclusive, but in theory, it does seem like maybe it might be able to decrease performance a little bit. So take that with a grain of salt. All right, so the last category, this is probably, I would say, actually the most important category. I know I said I didn't do this in any particular order, but it's actually two categories, but I'm going to marry it together. I'm going to talk about why: alcohol and sleep. And so we know that sleep is associated with a lot of good things, and there's an emerging body of research that shows that better sleep is better for just about everything you can think of physiologically, and bad sleep is bad for just about everything you can think of physiologically. So sleep is very important. And that's really come to light. And I would say that alcohol can certainly mess with people's sleep a lot, right? So we know people that take alcohol, obviously the night cappers, they can sometimes fall asleep better, but your quality of sleep tends to be poor. So we know that people that sleep poorly are probably not doing very well for a number of reasons, but you're certainly not going to be doing any favors to yourself from an anabolic perspective either, right? And so, this is kind of unrelated, but I think it's an example that sort of is applicable. Babies that have eczema, they're scratching at night a lot because they're uncomfortable, and It's obviously a terrible problem, but they also tend to have somewhat stunted growth compared to their peers that don't necessarily have eczema. And part of that is if you're scratching at night and you're awake, you're not sleeping as well, and so you're not releasing as much growth hormone and things of that nature that facilitate an anabolic response. So on a more micro level, that's something that could be playing out for people that aren't sleeping as well also, right? So if you're really looking to optimize your result and your performance, now, is alcohol doing anything against you in addition to poor sleep? I'd say the jury's a little bit out on that one. There was a big study that was done. It was an epidemiological study at a British biobank, and they looked at a huge group of people. It was like 200,000, I think. And, they basically were able to show that the people that drink the most alcohol, it's like 10 units a day, which is, maybe 4 or 5 pints, I think, had the most muscle wasting. But, with any epidemiological study, you have to take that with a grain of salt, because if you're drinking that much alcohol, it's highly likely, you maybe have a lot of other medical problems. You're probably not very, on top of your gym workouts, and possibly you're not even eating very well, right? So maybe you're just not consuming as much protein and things of that nature. So all those things could be confounds. And so I don't know if the alcohol per se is doing anything to you. Some studies show that maybe it is doing something, as far as inhibiting protein synthesis. So what I would say is, well, if it is doing something to you and you're really looking to optimize your anabolic environment, you probably want to try to keep it to a minimum. If you're drinking it moderately, maybe it's not doing as much to you. But in this study, again, 10 units, which is again like 4 or 5 pints, it did seem to be working against these people. But again, these weren't gym rats, so take that with a grain of salt. But I would say that if you're going to be drinking a lot of alcohol and you're not sleeping as well, it's probably not going to be doing you any favors in the gym. So all that to say, if you're really just trying to optimize your anabolic environment and you're really just trying to maximize performance, I would say probably keep alcohol to a minimum. Whether or not you need to eliminate it, that's probably a personal decision. Some people, I think, really derive a lot of benefits from alcohol, at least maybe socially, and they really love the taste and all those things, and it seems to improve their quality of life. Okay, fine. On the other hand, there might be some people that, don't really miss it that much, and they maybe don't, drink it just because it's there. And so to that person, I would probably say, well, then just go ahead and take it out, because it doesn't seem to be doing you any favors. So why have it in there? So again, that's my 2 cents on alcohol. Sleep, again, that could have been a much longer conversation, but in this video, I'm just going to say, try and do it. And maybe at some point I'll upload a video that's a little more comprehensive on sleep, but there it is for now. All right, so there's the 4 bins, and I know I did promise I was going to give you a little bonus today. This is a real small one. This isn't something that I think is going to be a deal breaker for anybody, but lavender and tea tree oil don't seem to be doing men a lot of favors. And so those are, 2 ingredients that are very common in a lot of soaps, a lot of shampoos. It's actually sometimes can be hard to find a deodorant that doesn't have, one of those 2 things in it, because it's used in a lot of skin products. But if you're a man that's really looking to optimize performance and you're really looking to optimize your testosterone levels and all those things, I would try to probably keep your lavender and tea tree oil to a minimum. I would say that the research is not extremely robust, but the research that is out there shows that it might be able to decrease your testosterone a little bit, possibly decrease your performance a little bit as far as, carrying over to your gym workouts. How much, I would say, again, it could be pretty mild. If you use these products all the time and you use high amounts of them, though, that might be where it's going to work against you. So if you're somebody who's, shampooing their hair several times a day, always washing their hands, using the deodorant that's got it, using face creams that's got it in there, and you're getting fairly high amounts of these things, then you're obviously also, putting lavender in your teas and all these things, that's when it might be working against you. If you're just getting a little bit here and there, I wouldn't kill yourself to try to omit it. But again, I know some people out there really do want to optimize every little thing about, what they're doing. And so if you're one of those people, I would try to keep those 2 things to a minimum. For the rest of you, I would say that those are those 4 categories for today. Any other broad bins you guys want to see discussed? There are a couple of other things I could have included in this video. I decided not to. I want to, again, mainly focus on the categories I think that will apply to, kind of a wide audience here. So as always, some of these things take with a grain of salt. Obviously research is sort of an ongoing and, ever evolving, enterprise. And so more studies are going to come out. Some of them might confirm what I'm saying in this video. Some of them might refute it. What I would say, though, is I think in general, these broad bins are going to stay pretty much consistent with what I've given you today. Obviously maybe not so much with like some of the newer drugs like the GLP-1, but I think, as far as sleep, I don't see that research changing a lot. I think you're going to always want to try to get some pretty good sleep to really maximize performance. So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Next video, I am going to try to get back to a little bit more conventional stuff. I'm going to show some different pieces of exercise equipment that I've got. I still do need to cover the BFR band video as well, which I said I was going to cover a little bit more in depth than I did in the last video. So that's also in the pipeline. As always, feel free to comment below. Let me know if you guys like this stuff and what else you might like to see. Please subscribe if you like this stuff. And as always, I hope you have some fun.